Well, the warrior principle concept came to me many years ago. I read a book called The Art of War by Sun Tzu. And in Sun Tzu's book, he talked about ancient principles that you can use in war. But many people were reading Sun Tzu's work, to get an advantage in business, in athletics and fashion in their respective fields. So it just came to me like, well, I can use this in the work that I do as a school principal. And so it was just an idea that was forming in my head for many years. And it wasn't until, the last maybe 2 or 3 years that I really started to pursue it and really, put the strategies into place and compare and contrast with, what Sun Tzu talked about in war with how, what the things that urban school principals go through. And when you think about it, when you really think about it, urban school principals and public school principals in general, they're actually fighting a war out here, all right, because they have to deal with everything from every part of the educational program, from teacher morale to students' achievement, to the custodians, to security, to ordering books. And then you have forces that are at work, all right, and I'm going to just leave it at that. I'm going to let you read the book in order to find out. But there's, especially, I don't want to spoil it for those who haven't read it yet, but there are forces at work that seem like they want to keep the status quo, that they don't want certain schools to achieve and whatnot. So when you throw all of those factors into place, the warrior principle, it was appropriately titled, all right? So that's where basically the concept comes from. It's funny you ask that because a lot of principals, they misunderstand me when I say that traditions has a way of making principles ineffective. Because most times when you think of traditions, they make people feel comfortable. They make people feel good. They lend to routines, which create social norms, and they're an intricate part of the school culture. But they become debilitating for principals when principals follow them blindly. All right. When they follow traditions because that's how things have always been done, all right? Or they're just doing it because the principal before them had, a certain routine, a certain norm, a certain tradition in place, and they're just following them blindly. And then they wonder why they don't positively impact the school's culture. See, anytime you have a tradition or routine or some sort of social norm, it has to be connected to the stakeholders and what the greater community, school community values. You can't just do something just out of tradition or just do it just because that's how it's always been done. And that's what makes principals in public school settings ineffective, because they're just repeating the same old stale practices that someone else has done, or that's just how things have been without looking at the circumstances or the problems that confronts them and confronts their students and the rest of the stakeholders on a regular basis. In my book, The Warrior Principle, Chapter 6, I call that Rallying the Troops. And I use that as a metaphor for, a principal that has to improve the morale of his staff, his or her staff. Because in most public schools, it's no secret that morale is definitely a problem for teachers and the whole staff in general, especially in schools that service a large population of students who live in poverty, near poverty, or low socioeconomic status. So it's an ongoing task for principals to keep their teachers and the rest of their support staff motivated and encouraged. And so what most principals do, they come up with things that are generic, like Teacher Appreciation Day, Teacher Appreciation Week. They have Staff Person of the Month, those kind of things, all right? But those things are generic and they typically don't resonate with the people. Therefore, that you don't get the results that you're after. And the staff still, morale still remains low from one year to the next. But in Sun Tzu's book, The Art of War, he talked about something called death ground, all right? And that's when he used to put his soldiers in situations where they could have their back against the wall. They can be outnumbered, all right? And Sun Tzu's philosophy is, if I train my soldiers to the best of their ability, and if I put them in a situation where they're back against the wall, they're going to fight their way out. And excuse my French, they're going to fight like hell to get out. So that's what you call death ground. So Sun Tzu would periodically put his soldiers on death ground to give them that fighting spirit, to give them that edge, and to give them that confidence, because if you were put in a situation where it's do or die, and then you survive, your soldiers get a feeling of exhilaration, a feeling of empowerment. They're looking for the next task because they feel confident that they can handle and deal with any situation that comes their way. So I use that same concept in the public school setting, where I say principals need to periodically put their staff members on death ground. And what I mean by that is a metaphor. So you put a person on death ground when you take them out their comfort zone. You take them out their comfortable state and put them in something different, where they have to learn a new skill. They have to think on their feet. They have to learn a new task. You give them deadlines that they have to meet. Give them challenges. All right, if they typically work in a setting where they have to sit down, then you give them tasks where they have to stand up. If they're typically stationary, then you make them move. All right. If they're typically, take their time and be able to do different things to accomplish different goals, you give them deadlines and you press them. And what that does is, number one, it creates a sense of urgency. All right, and that's what a lot of public schools need. They need a staff that feels that sense of urgency, so they can move and get into action. And then two, if you move a person from one particular task to another, or you move them, say for example, you have a teacher, and this is typical. You have teachers who been teaching in the same classroom, teaching the same subject in the same school building for 15, 20, 30, some even 30 years. Now just imagine, and I'm not talking about trying to talk about any one particular person or any group of people, and I'm not trying to highlight teachers in general, but just imagine how stagnant you can be, all right? But if you move that teacher who's been teaching in that same room just to another classroom, or instead of that teacher teaching 5th grade, move them to 6th grade. All right, so when you leave one state to another, that's almost like a symbolic death ground. So they have to learn new tasks. They have to be forced to think on their feet, to adjust to the circumstances that they're a part of. And so that's what I talk about in the Warrior Principle in that particular chapter. And I go into detail about how principals should go about, periodically, putting their staff on death ground to create that sense of urgency. See, chapter 8 of the Warrior Principle, this is the chapter that has caused the most controversy. This is the one that I typically get the most flack for. I don't know why, but when people hear the word spies, all right, they automatically think of something that's dishonest, untruthful, disingenuous. But really, that's not what it's about. Sun Tzu talked about using spies to gain an advantage in war. That how if you're a general, you're a strategist, military strategist, you're a king, queen of a sovereign nation, you need access to information. You need to know what the enemy is doing, or you need to know what your subjects are doing. You need to know everything, all access to information, because one little nugget of information can be the thing that change the tide, or the thing that gives you that advantage, that turning point, when you can become the victor in a situation, or to make things better. All right, so I took that same concept and brought it to the school level. And even though we don't call it spies in the public school setting, we use terms like building capacity, having leaders, building leaders at all levels. And so the terminology may be different, but the concept is still the same, because a principal, no matter what setting that he or she is in, whether it's elementary, middle, or high school, they need access to information at all times. They need to know what their students are feeling and thinking. They need to know what their teachers are feeling and thinking. They need to know the attitudes and opinions of the community. They need to know the parents. All stakeholders that actively are actively involved with the school, that interact with the school in some capacity, you need keen information available and accessible to you at all times. And the principal is only one person. Out of all of the people that are in the school setting, everybody has a peer group or somebody that they can link up with on every level. All right. The principal is the only person that doesn't have a peer group in the school setting, and that's why they say that once you become a principal, it's lonely at the top. All right, because you don't have nobody that you could share and bounce ideas off, unless you go call another colleague in another school building or school district, but they're busy doing their thing, so you don't get to really connect with them like how you want to. So one person can't be all places at all times. So as a principal, if you're going to keep your fingertip on the pulse of the school culture and the school community, you need access to information. All right, and so like I'm using Sun Tzu's terminology, you need spies on all levels. You need student spies, you need teacher spies, or you need spies in the cafeteria, you need spies outside, you need spies in the neighborhood, and you need people that could bring you information and they can also deliver messages out to various stakeholders. Now, how do you go about building these relationships with folks? How do you go about having a person feel comfortable with sharing information with you and whatnot? You got to get the book for that. I'm not going to go into detail.